Our lives turned into hell in an instant. We learned that my Judy was in the hands of one of the most dangerous criminals. Detective Johnson said we should prepare for the worst. With every passing minute, hope was fading. But what happened next left us stunned. My whole body was trembling. I couldn't believe my eyes. The incident that happened to our family shocked not only me, but also our relatives. To be honest, I didn't find the courage to speak about what happened to my Judy for a long time. But considering the looming danger, I can no longer remain silent. To be frank, serious crimes rarely occur around here, especially of this nature. But that hellish day shattered our lives in a second. It was Judy's birthday. We were celebrating her 7th anniversary. Our relatives and Judy's friends were invited. The celebration was taking place in our garden. Naturally, we also invited costumed characters of animated heroes and other fairy tale figures. Many faces were hidden behind the costumes. Everything was going well. The children were dancing and having fun while the characters entertained them. As night fell, we invited the children inside to continue the celebration and open their gifts. My husband saw off the clowns and heroes, and we all entered the house together. There were many people at home, and everyone was mixed up. My husband was entertaining the guests while I washed the plates in the kitchen to refresh the table. About 20 minutes later, one of the children came into the kitchen and asked where Judy was. I said to check in her room. She might have gone to change. The child replied that they had searched the whole house and couldn't find her. They said they had a special gift prepared for Judy and wanted to give it to her personally. Honestly, at that moment, I felt a bit uneasy. Leaving my task unfinished, I went to the living room and asked my husband if he had seen Judy. He replied no. The unease quickly turned into panic. I ran upstairs to her room. I opened the door, but there was no one there. It was empty. Seeing my state, my husband began to worry too. He asked what was wrong and why I was so flustered. I told him I couldn't find Judy. He was surprised. We immediately ran out. Our guests had already realized that we were looking for Judy. None of the children had seen her since entering the house. We went outside and started searching for her. We called her name loudly, but there was no response. For a moment, I even thought, could this be a mean prank by the kids, and Judy hadn't really gone missing? In a state of panic, I roughly confronted the children, insisting they tell me where Judy was. Seeing that I was losing control, my husband approached and forcibly took me back inside the house. After a few minutes of searching for Judy and realizing this wasn't a prank, my husband immediately called 911. At first, I thought Judy had just stepped out of the house, but I couldn't imagine where. I remember one of our relatives came up to me and said it would be wise not to rule anything out. I got angry and asked what they meant. They replied that if Judy had simply left the house, she should be back soon, but it was possible she hadn't gone willingly. Naturally, they hinted at abduction, which I didn't even want to entertain. But considering that all the other children were home except for her, I began to think along those lines too. If Judy wanted to go anywhere, even for 10 minutes, she would have definitely asked for my permission. Moreover, at that late hour, she would be afraid to leave the house alone. Before the police arrived, my husband called the company that had sent the clowns and cartoon characters to get some information. When the police came, we were all at home. They asked questions of the guests and Judy's friends and requested that either my husband or I accompany them to the station. They also asked for the footage from our home security cameras. Unfortunately, there were no cameras installed in the yard, and the indoor footage would reveal nothing since no one had seen Judy. Regardless, they demanded the recordings. After getting them, I asked my husband to stay at home. We requested our relatives to escort any children who had come alone back to their homes. We also asked the kids not to tell anyone outside the family about what had happened. Honestly, at first, I was surprised the police said I had to go to the station, as I thought anything I could tell them there, I could also share at home. I saw no point in going to the station. At that moment, I had no idea what horror awaited me. Since that was the police's request, I agreed, and we went. When we arrived, I was taken to the investigator's office. He asked me to sit down and said that whatever I said, I needed to remain calm and composed. Otherwise, I would not only hinder the investigation, but also not be able to help. Clearly, those words made me more anxious, and I asked him to get straight to the point, promising I wouldn't lose my composure. The investigator told me that this was already the second report they had received about a child disappearing in 3 days. They had strong suspicions that if Judy had been kidnapped, it was the same perpetrator. He mentioned that the cases were very similar. 3 days earlier, they had received another report of a child being kidnapped during a birthday celebration. Unable to listen to the investigator any longer, I lost my balance, consciousness, and fell from the chair. After I was revived, they offered to escort me home, asking me to come back the next day. I refused, saying I wouldn't leave until my child, my Judy, was found. About 30 minutes later, my husband arrived. The police had asked him to come and take me home. 2 officers were watching the house at that time. We returned home, but we couldn't sleep the entire night. The next day, in the afternoon, the investigator personally came to our house. He announced that they had certain information regarding the perpetrator and were already working on it. He said that the criminal was likely dressed as a clown. They had already verified everything and learned that none of the many clowns who had come to our house were related to the kidnapping, except for one. Both my husband and I remembered there were 3 clowns, but it was confirmed that the company that sent them had only sent 2 clowns. Therefore, the kidnapper was most likely the 3rd clown. All of this increasingly reminded me of a horror film, but the reality was scarier than I could have imagined. The number of suspects was decreasing, considering that the other 2 clowns and all the cartoon characters had gone straight to their office after leaving our house, thus providing an alibi. However, the issue remained unresolved, because we didn't know who the 3rd clown was and where he had taken my Judy. The investigator mentioned they had obtained footage from all nearby houses and were reviewing the recordings to identify the vehicles that passed through the area around the time in question. After bidding farewell to the investigator, we joined the search efforts. Later that evening, the investigator called to inform us that they had analyzed the license plates of all vehicles except one, which was painted in a specific color. It was suspected that Judy had been abducted using that vehicle, but they needed to question all the drivers whose cars were in the area. Regarding the other child's disappearance, the investigator stated that the situation was somewhat different. That child had been taken not from home or the yard, but from another location. The girl, who was about 10 or 11 years old, had disappeared after walking her friend home, which wasn't far from her own house, and she went missing on her way back. After the incident, the police immediately began search operations. They already had a rough idea of the time and place of the child's disappearance. With the police's permission, we also hired a private detective, who was a friend of my husband's. Detective Johnson, after asking a few important questions and hearing the clarifications, outlined the plan of action. There was no time to lose. Every minute was precious. We had to act quickly. He promised that he would definitely find the child, my Judy. We already had some information that the criminal, after kidnapping people of various ages, would take his victims and keep them in some old cabin or hideout in the forest. I was terrified by my own thoughts, imagining how my Judy was going through those hard and painful hours. I was certain that in that dark and cold house, she would lose herself and might never be able to return to a normal life. Although we had a rough idea, we needed to find the house where my child was being kept as soon as possible. We had heard that he was indeed a very dangerous man. There was even information that he would connect with his victims, trying to erase their past, and supposedly give them a new life. Both my husband and I were extremely anxious and terrified. When you know that your child is with some fanatic, you can't stay calm for even a second, nor resist the overwhelming emotions. But no matter how great the pain was, we had to endure and fight. The police, after a long search, finally discovered the location where the criminal might be hiding. It was possible that he could be armed, but they had to hurry, as he could leave at any moment or cause harm. Time was running out. Everything possible and impossible had to be done to arrest that fanatic before it was too late. Detective Johnson, who had also provided some crucial information, was equally convinced that they needed to act quickly before it was too late. But how great was our surprise when suddenly I received a call on my phone and heard Judy's voice. She was anxious and speaking very quickly. She said she had met some people who were bringing her home. Suppressing my emotions, I told Judy to pass the phone to the driver. The driver was Armenian but spoke English fluently. He said Judy told him she had gotten lost and asked him to take her home. Without asking unnecessary questions, he confirmed the address and agreed. To my surprise, Judy hadn't told him the truth, thinking that it might scare the driver if she revealed the reality. I repeated our address to the driver and asked him to hurry and take my child home, promising him a large sum of money for that. He hung up the phone. Immediately, I called my husband, who was outside at the time, to inform him of the blissful news. After talking, a strange calmness came over me, but seconds later, that calmness turned into panic. My husband called back and said the phone number I had given him was not answering. My hands began to shake. For a moment, I even thought that the caller might be the criminal himself, forcing Judy to call me. After another unsuccessful attempt to call, I immediately contacted the investigator to inform him of what had happened. He told me to stay calm. My phone number was supposedly being monitored, and they already knew the location of the caller. I demanded that they send police right away, but the investigator asked me not to rush and to stay calm. Whatever they needed to do, they would do it. Minutes felt like hours. I didn't let go of the phone for a second. I knelt on the ground and prayed that Judy would call again, at least to hear her voice one more time. Soon, I stepped out into the street, hoping that Judy would show up any moment. About an hour later, a car approached our house and gradually slowed down. Before the car had completely parked, the door opened and Judy jumped out. I looked at her, unable to believe my eyes. Uncontrollably, I began to slap my cheeks several times to make sure this wasn't a dream. I stood frozen in place, unable to move even half a meter forward. It was Judy, my Judy. She ran to me and hugged me tightly. Slowly, I lowered my head to see her. I don't know what was happening to me in those moments, but I felt as if I were paralyzed. A moment later, the driver also approached us. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked. I didn't respond. "Ma'am?" He repeated his question in a louder voice. I snapped back to reality, hugged Judy, and tears started streaming down my face like a waterfall. I couldn't speak. I crouched down, hugged Judy tightly, and didn't want to let go. But Judy quickly brought me back to reality. I thanked the driver and asked him to come inside, but he refused, saying he was late for his other errands. We agreed that I would call him during the day. Together with Judy, we entered the house. I called my husband to share the news, but I couldn't speak. Judy took the phone and talked to her father. I watched my child. She looked so grown up and mature that I was amazed at how I had not recognized my Judy until now. At that moment, the investigator called and said he was aware of Judy's situation and asked me to pass the phone to her immediately. Judy told him everything she knew and remembered. I watched my daughter speak with such courage and clarity to the investigator, and I felt proud of her. Fortunately, the police managed to arrest the criminal who hadn't managed to escape. They found him on the road. Realizing Judy was missing, he had decided to flee, but he was unsuccessful. They also discovered the other girl in his house. Judy recounted that in the basement where they were held, she noticed that a small, narrow window was moving in the wind. With the help of the other girl, she climbed onto her shoulders and saw that the nails holding the window were loose and swaying. They understood that they could pry them out with some object. After waiting for some time and hearing a car moving, they thought it was the right moment. Hearing the sound of the car gradually fading away, they realized that their captor had likely left. Using a piece of iron found in the basement, Judy further loosened the nails and broke the window. Since she was small in stature but had boundless courage, she squeezed through the narrow opening and ran away. Fortunately, the house where the children were held was about 300 meters from the street and visible from afar. Judy ran toward the highway and flagged down the first passing car, asking to be taken home. Honestly, I don't want to talk about Judy's feelings. I will just say that she is truly a hero. She always said she wanted her birthdays to be unforgettable. I believe my Judy will never forget her 7th birthday. But she will remember not the kidnapping, but the heroism she displayed in saving herself, the other victim, and all of us. I also want to express my deepest gratitude to the police and all the people involved in the search for my Judy, especially Investigator Peterson. As for how Judy went missing, I'll explain now. At the moment, the children were already entering the house. The criminal, dressed as a clown, told Judy that her parents, meaning us, had a special surprise for her. But for it to happen, all the children had to go home while she stayed outside, ensuring no one noticed her absence. He told Judy to secretly get into the car so that no one would see her. There, she would not be seen, and she would receive the big surprise prepared by us. Finally, I would like to say that no matter how brave and clever our children are, they must never forget their innocence and the importance of trusting others. They should always be vigilant to avoid repeating my mistake.